So, John, we have a couple of things to look at, and I wanted to have you as part of the audience as we listen to and watch some of the questioning that Pam Bondi, who is the Attorney General nominee for Donald Trump. You'll recall that I know you'll recall, but everyone will recall that Matt Gaetz was originally another Floridian asked to do that job. He withdrew after there was a lot of let's say, not just consternation, but speculation as to why, and his fitness for the office was questioned to the point where he couldn't do it. He resigned his seat in Congress, and he pulled out of that. Pam Bondi now there, and Pam Bondi in what is always a hot seat. So let's take a look with the audience of the Mark Thompson Show at some of what she endured today. I think we're starting, Albert, with Mazie Hirono, Democrat of Hawaii, is on the committee that is, charged with the Judiciary Committee, charged with the Attorney General's confirmation. The way it works is they will vote out of committee, and that nomination will then be sent to the Senate floor and voted on by the entire Senate. A lot of the questions about Bondi are the fact that she worked in the White House on the White House counsel staff during, I think it was the second impeachment. People saying that she is Trump's personal lawyer, that she is somebody who never accepted the results of the 2020 election, never was able to say that President Biden won that election. And the committee, of course, questioning her on that. Here's Senator Hirono, as Albert has brought up.
I believe that you responded to a question from Senator Whitehouse, and let me get your response again. You said that the White House, if I'm putting words in your mouth, correct me. Oh, you said that the White House will play no role in investigative or charging decisions in the DOJ. Is that correct?
Senator, what I said is that it is the Department of Justice's decision to determine what cases will be prosecuted.
What role will the White House have in investigative or prosecutorial decisions of the DOJ?
It is the Department of Justice's decision, Senator.
So that sounds to me that you're saying that the White House will not have any kind of role. Meanwhile, though, you have an incoming president who said, I have the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department. And in fact, President-elect Trump considers the DOJ to be his law firm. I ask you this. If President-elect Trump suggests, or hints that you as Attorney General should investigate one of his proceedings, would you do so?
Had you met
Well, a little choppy there. Part of that interview before I think we got to that was, or part of that interrogation was Hirono being asked if Joe Biden won the election in 2020. And Bondi said Joe Biden is president of the United States. Under further interrogation, it was dispensed with because she was not able to say whether or not that election was won by Joe Biden. In response here, and Albert, you can let us know when you have a little more footage if we get any. She was asked about, as we just heard, and for the most part, whether or not this will be an arm of the White House and the president will be able to go after whomever he wants, especially political enemies, which is the fear because he is postured that way, and he thinks, and a lot of his supporters feel, that he was unfairly targeted by a Justice Department run amok. And of course, Ted Cruz came on afterwards and said that no president had ever been investigated or had 4 charges against them, as if that means that what happened to Trump was unfair. No president had done, or certainly had done to the extent what Donald Trump had done when he was in office to warrant such investigation. Here is a little more from Mazie Hirono.
I want to ask you a factual question.
Here it is.
Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden is the president of the United States.
Ms. Bondi, you know that there is a difference between acknowledging it and, I can say that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. I may not like it, but I can say it. You cannot say who won the 2020 presidential election. Okay. it's disturbing that you can't give voice to that fact. Moving on to DOJ's independence from politics. Ms. Bondi, if you are confirmed as Attorney General, you will take an oath to the Constitution and not to any individual, including the President. To start, I'd like to know whether you agree with some of the statements President-elect Trump made during the election, during the campaign. First, are the felons convicted of breaking into the Capitol on January 6th hostages or patriots, quoting Trump, as President-elect Trump has said repeatedly? Do you agree with his characterization of the felons that I referred to?
I am not familiar with that statement, Senator.
I just familiarized you with that statement. Do you agree with that statement?
I'm not familiar with it, Senator.
No answer. He has also said illegal immigration is poisoning the blood of our nation. He said that in December 2023. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I am not familiar with that statement, but what I can tell you is I went to the border a few months ago. I went to Yuma, Arizona, and what I saw at that border was horrific, Senator. It was horrific.
Ms. Bondi,
I went to a rape crisis center.
That is
If I could
not my
finish,
question.
I went to a rape crisis center. Well, I'm not familiar with the statement, but I went to a rape crisis center. I met with Border Patrol agents. I'm sure you've been to the border as well. So
I want to get to my next question. So I believe that you responded to a question from Senator Whitehouse, and let me get your response again. You said that the White
I think I played this for you a little earlier. This clip right here.
What's that?
This just the next few minutes.
That was that you played it. Yeah, that's right. So there you see Pam Bondi. I mean, as a reporter, I've been to the border many times over the past several years. That's not the question that was asked of Pam Bondi, but in the whole scope and history of these confirmation hearings, it's about avoiding and evading the direct answers that you want your president who nominated you to hear, while also getting through what is always a very difficult day with breaks from the other side and the Republicans, including the chairman, Chuck Grassley, of that committee. Ted Cruz himself were very kind. Let's bring John Rothmann in on this. What's been missing from what we've said, John, and welcome to the show as well.
Pleasure to be with you. Look, the simple truth is that Donald Trump is determined to weaponize the Justice Department. Pam Bondi is a political partisan, former Attorney General of Florida. She denies that Joe Biden won the election of 2020. She was a defender of Donald Trump's ridiculous accusation that he, in fact, won the election. She is committed to Donald Trump, and her oath will be to the Constitution, but her loyalty is clearly to Donald Trump. And you heard that in the evasive answers that she has given. But the weaponization of the Justice Department is something I am fearful of. That also involves Kash Patel as being the director of the FBI. Director of the FBI reports directly to the Attorney General of the United States. This is something that should concern all Americans. I do believe that we cannot make judgments until they are in office. But if their words are any indication of what they intend to do, then we are in for a very interesting ride for the next 4 years. Yeah, by the way, that presumes that Pam Bondi or anybody lasts, because I would remind you, Donald Trump has a tendency to fire attorney generals who disagree with him. And that included Jeff Sessions, who was the first senator to endorse him.
And it's because of Jeff Sessions leaving and going to the Department of Justice that we have Tommy Tuberville to talk about in any other sphere except
that is correct. And if you listen to Tuberville, including statements he's made in the last few days, it's outrageous and egregious.
Yeah, there's no question. I want to ask you this. I'm going to try and put on my objective glasses for a moment. I'm a Republican. I think that Donald Trump, and I'm just obviously play acting here, that Donald Trump has been unfairly attacked, that this has been a Justice Department with an agenda. Why shouldn't my president then do the same in turn to the people that he perceives as his political enemies? What's the answer to that?
Well, the first answer is that if the Justice Department had been weaponized, Donald Trump would have gone to trial. And he didn't, because the Attorney General, the sitting Attorney General of the United States, did everything he could to appear to be fair. I want also to be clear when I tell you that I think Republicans are now supporting Trump because, as Donald Trump Jr. said on the Ellipse on January 6th, it is no longer the Republican Party, it is the party of Donald Trump. So if you take a look at the people who have been nominated, this is not done in a bipartisan fashion. This is not done in a fashion of trying to accommodate Democrats and Republicans alike. And so what you are going to see, what we are going to see, is the most partisan administration in American history. And that's the simple truth.
Yeah, there's no question that, as Gene Rayburn would say on Match Game, it was the definitive answer. It is. There's no question that everything that John just said is absolutely right. You brought up when you look at all these nominees, I switched over to watching. Think that I have such a pathetic life, but I was switched over to watching John Ratcliffe's, and he's the designee to head the CIA. And I saw someone who I don't agree with generally, who when he was in Congress, I found, a very difficult guy. But it seemed like it was a throwback to watching a confirmation hearing in 1991. Here was a person who was from another party who was being, interrogated by that committee to have that job, and he was appointed by a Republican president. There are always going to be people that you like or don't like, but it seemed like this is the kind of substantive person that should be on on one of these panels. And then you look at Pete Hegseth, and then you look at Pam Bondi, and then we're going to look at Tulsi Gabbard, and we're going to look at others. Do you have that same? Do you get that same vibe? Is what I mean to say?
Of course. Yeah. Look, Marco Rubio. I don't agree with Marco Rubio on many things, but he will be a capable Secretary of State. And a president really appoints someone or nominates someone, a Secretary of State, who they can work with. Yeah. But the important element here is the partisan nature of what Donald Trump is doing. I always remember that Franklin Roosevelt put two Republicans in his cabinet. Frank Knox, who had been the nominee for vice president in 1936, became Secretary of the Navy, and Stimson, Henry Stimson, became Secretary of War, if you will, and he had been Secretary of State under Hoover. I would point out to you that John F. Kennedy turned to C. Douglas Dillon, who had been Undersecretary of the Treasury under the Eisenhower administration, to become Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, rather. He was Undersecretary of State, then Secretary of the Treasury. And the same thing applies with Bob McNamara. Bob McNamara was a Republican who became Secretary of Defense. There is no bipartisanship in this administration. Tulsi Gabbard was, in fact, a Democrat, but she is now a Republican and a firm supporter of Donald Trump. And I won't even mention her accusation that forest fires were started here in California by Jewish lasers from outer space. Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense. But let me explain. A president of the United States has the prerogative of surrounding him or herself one day with people that they want. And the nominees that Donald Trump has placed in position are an indication of his mindset. Let me remind everybody that Kamala Harris, had she taken the oath, would have offered a completely different cast of characters. But that is where we are today.
Yeah, there's no question. Albert, let me ask you, we want to watch Alex Padilla as well. Alex Padilla is, and John, I should tell you, there is a poll, a community poll on the Mark Thompson show that shows.
I saw it.
Yeah, that nearly 70% of the people participating in that poll believe that Hegseth will not be.
Well, you understand, that goes to the heart of the politics of our area and the people who listen to the Mark Thompson program. Right. He is going to be confirmed, although he should not be by all rights. And you can be assured, if this were a Democratic nominee with Hegseth's record, the Republicans would have opposed it. But the simple fact is, there are enough Republicans, 53 Republicans in the United States Senate, who are going to vote. And you mentioned Joni Ernst earlier. Trump is threatening to primary her. I don't think she really has to worry about being primaried, but that's not what checks and balances are supposed to be about. The reason the Constitution designates the approval of cabinet officers is a check and a balance, advise and consent. And unfortunately, the Republicans are failing in that category. And by the way, I wish they would be more vigorous. They're not doing their job, and that's very upsetting.
It is indeed, and their job, the advising consent we talked about it yesterday. It's never more sort of out there for everyone to see than it is in these confirmation hearings. They're there to advise, not the president. They're there to advise the entire Senate, who in older times would not have had the ability to watch a judiciary committee in their office. If you're on the energy committee and you're not on judiciary, you can now sit in your office and watch these hearings. Before, it was actual advise and consent, where they'd say, hey, we interviewed this person and they're good for the job or they're not. And then
right now, by the way, cabinet officers have been rejected. Ted Sorensen,
of course,
was rejected as head of the CIA, had to withdraw his nomination because of conflicts.
John Tower.
John Tower, who was Secretary of Defense designate. Louis Strauss as Secretary of Commerce under the Eisenhower administration. There are countless examples of people whose qualifications are challenged. But this Senate is rolling over. The Republicans are rolling over. And I would suggest they are not doing their constitutional duty.
I don't think it would be hard to argue with that. Albert, let's listen to California's senator, the junior senator, actually senior senator now, because Adam Schiff is the junior senator, Alex Padilla. Let's listen to Alex Padilla doing some of this interrogating, and John, if you could, after we hear that, give a little analysis of this and what the importance is for a U.S. senator to be doing here, aside from the actual work of the interrogation. This is Padilla questioning Pam Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I just want to remind us all for the record that the 34 convictions, not indictments, convictions of former President, incoming President Trump were by a jury of his peers. Thank you, Ms. Bondi, for being here today. And I, too, would like to welcome your family and friends who are here.
Thank you.
Appreciated the opportunity to meet yesterday to learn about your priorities and discuss a number of issues that are important to me. But I got to tell you, as I reflected on our conversation yesterday and as I've observed the hearing today, I continue to have significant reservations on your ability to function as a truly independent Attorney General for your friend. Let's say you keep referring to him, your friend, President-elect Trump. So I hope you can address some of these concerns through your responses to my questions here. Now, the first issue area is something that we didn't get a chance to touch on yesterday. So I actually want to follow up on some of Senator Durbin's questions from earlier about the 2020 election. And to be specific, on the day after the 2020 presidential general election, you traveled to Philadelphia to appear alongside President Trump's then attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And together, you falsely asserted that President Trump had, quote, won Pennsylvania in that election. Now, I want to be clear, at that moment, there were still at least 1 million ballots left to be counted in Pennsylvania. Of course, President Biden went on to win the state by more than 80,000 votes. But in the following days, even after the results were clear, you continued to double down on the big lie, promoting falsehoods about election fraud and cheating without offering any actual evidence. And I remember it clearly because I served as California Secretary of State at the time, and I invited anybody associated with the Trump campaign who was making these claims to come forward with evidence of irregularities in the election or massive voter fraud. 4 years later, I still have seen none. So I ask you today, do you have any evidence of election fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election?
So, First Senator.
Yes or no? It's a yes or no question.
First Senator.
Do you have evidence, yes or no?
First Senator. I'm so sorry about the fires to you and Senator Schiff and what you're going through in your states. I have to say that.
I appreciate that.
All
My
of our,
clock is
I'll
ticking,
answer
and I
your
want to
question. All
hear
of our
your answer.
hearts go out to everyone in California for what you're facing right now. I'm glad you asked the question about Pennsylvania.
It's a yes or no question.
I was
Do
hoping
you have evidence,
someone
yes or
would.
no?
Senator, I was hoping you'd ask the question.
Do you have
Yes, I
evidence, yes or no?
I traveled to Pennsylvania.
Do you have the
I
evidence, yes
traveled,
or no?
Senator, to Pennsylvania.
Okay, you're not answering my question. If you have no evidence to offer, let me ask you this. Will you now retract your previous statements that Trump won Pennsylvania in the 2020 election, yes or no?
Oh, Senator, I traveled to Pennsylvania, and let me tell you what I saw firsthand.
Yes or
I didn't,
no?
I didn't talk about California because I was not in California. I talked about
Yes or no?
I
Last time I'm
talked
going to ask.
about I talked about Pennsylvania because
Mr.
I was
Chair,
there.
I'm going to move on because
You
she's
got a
clearly not
court
answering my
order
questions. And
to
I want to know,
observe.
colleagues, for everybody, members of the committee and everybody watching, that the attorney who stood beside Mr. Giuliani was making very similar statements. And he has since been disbarred from multiple jurisdictions for making these false claims about the 2020 election in court. And like Mr. Giuliani, as you've noted today, you've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution just as an attorney. And now you're asking us to consider you to serve as the chief law enforcement officer in our country. So it's imperative, Ms. Bondi, that you subscribe to facts and evidence and not politically convenient conspiracy theories. Your job will be, your job will be to protect voters and election workers, not to undermine and dox them. Now, I know that earlier you agreed that Joe Biden is in fact president, but many of the president-elect's inner circle continue to spread the big lie about the 2020 election. Then we'll move on to a different topic.
Senator, you were speaking. May I speak? You cut me off when I was speaking. When I ask you the next question, you can speak, and I hope you answer, Ms. Bondi. Well, I'd like to answer the previous one, Senator.
When we met yesterday,
you pointed your finger at me and said you were speaking. Let me answer my question. I'm not going to be bullied by you, Senator
Padilla. The 14th Amendment of the United States of America, which was deeply disappointing.
I guess you didn't want to hear my answer about
today after I gave an opportunity to study overnight. So can you tell me and this committee what the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment says?
Senator, I'm here to answer your questions. I'm not here to do your homework and study for you. If I am confirmed as Attorney General.
You're the one asking for a confirmation
hey,
vote,
you
ma'am.
cut me off. Can I please finish?
What does the 14th Amendment say?
Senator, the 14th Amendment, we all know, addresses birthright citizenship. I've been a state prosecutor. I've been a state AG. I look forward to, even given your remarks today, working with you and the people of California if I am confirmed as the 87th Attorney General of the United States of America. I didn't take your homework assignment. I'm sorry. I was preparing for today.
So on the 14th Amendment, now you've testified repeatedly to this committee that you will uphold the laws of this country and defend the Constitution of the United States. Do you believe birthright citizenship is the law of the land, and will you defend it regardless of a child born in the United States, regardless of their parents' immigration status?
Senator, I will study birthright citizenship. I would love to meet with you regarding birthright citizenship. Can I answer the
serve
question?
As the Attorney General of the United States, and you still need to study the 14th Amendment of the Constitution? That is not helping me have more confidence in your ability to do this job. One other immigration-related question, I'll steer clear of the Constitution
I have one
and
regarding
the law.
that I'd like
Senator
to talk
Hirona
about.
asked you earlier, but I don't think you answered her question. Can you please tell us, do you agree with the statement that immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, yes or no?
I did not say that.
I did not say that. You said that. I'm asking if you agree with it, yes or no?
I did not say that.
Do you agree with it, yes or no?
My great-grandparents are immigrants.
Do you agree with it,
They
yes or no?
came here from Sicily
Do you agree
through
with it,
Ellis
yes or
Island
no?
when they were teenagers.
Do you agree with it, yes or no?
Senator, let me answer the question.
Yes or no? It's
My
real simple.
great-grandparents came here, immigrated to this country from Sicily, recently went and found each of their birth certificates. We are a nation made up of immigrants. Do I believe immigrants are poisoning our country? No, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I can't wait for the second round.
That's a lot of mic drops today. Can't wait for the second round. So there you had it again, Alex Padilla questioning Pam Bondi. It's been a lot of this, John. I'll let you speak about it. We've got Israel to cover. We got Pete Hegseth to cover. But again, what are you seeing here in Pam Bondi?
Well, you understand exactly what she'll do as Attorney General. She'll do exactly what the White House asks. She does oppose birthright in the 14th Amendment. She wants to change it. She's made it very clear. She does believe that Trump actually won the 2020 election. She is unwilling to say that Biden won the election. She's willing to say Biden is the president, but not that Biden won the election. This is consistent with her notion that she has to please Donald Trump. And she does, because you know what happens to an attorney general who doesn't please Donald Trump. Just ask Bill Barr, ask Jeff Sessions. It's, may I tell you, look, I'm not here as a Democrat or as a Republican. I'm here as an American. And what bothers me is that the people who are being put in positions of power on too many levels in the Trump administration scare the living bejeebers out of me. And in a normal time, the Republican Party would rebel against this. But Republicans are afraid of Donald Trump, and they are afraid to cross him, and that's a problem. Look what happened to Mike Pence, for God's sake. And by the way, at the Carter funeral, they finally shook hands for the first time. But let me tell you, J.D. Vance understands his role is to agree with Donald Trump, and I'm sure he will.
Yeah, there's no question. J.D. Vance's job is different than the job of the people that work in the Justice Department.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But he will be the vice president. And if you take the precedent of history, he has a very good shot at becoming president of the United States. Of not so much recent history, it turns out, but yes. John. No, I disagree with you with all due respect. Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, I would remind you, George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
So there is, and Al Gore very nearly became. So, you know, who is vice president matters. It's not, as the old story went by Thomas Riley Marshall, a mother who had two sons. One went to sea, the other became vice president, and neither one was ever heard from again.
Of course, and I was being tongue-in-cheek. I was talking about very recently. I was talking about Vice President Harris. That's all. No. I mean, it has been the jumping-off point with its own inherent challenges as well that come about, that we saw Harris having to deal with. We saw Gore having to deal with in terms of distancing themselves from
exactly.
It's fascinating historical stuff. Albert, I want to run a little bit of. We have Tammy Duckworth, I think. Do we have Tammy Duckworth talking to Pete Hegseth at all? Do we still have that, Albert?
Let me cue that up real quick. Give
Okay.
me like 1 minute.
We're going to skip back to Pete Hegseth a little bit here. And again, there's a community poll up, and we invite you to vote in that as to whether or not Pete Hegseth will be confirmed as Defense Secretary today. Joni Ernst, a powerful Republican on the Armed Services Committee, but powerful also because of her service, because she is a woman, because she was a past victim of sexual assault and harassment. And those are some of the allegations leveled against Hegseth, that he doesn't approve the way most do of women in the military and the roles they should play, as well as the fact that he was accused in 2017 of rape, settled that, was never convicted, was never tried. But nonetheless, these things have crept up on him a little bit. And so Joni Ernst supporting Hegseth is important. Here is Tammy Duckworth, herself a Purple Heart recipient, lost 2 legs and the use of her right arm in Iraq. She's a U.S. Senator from the state of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also Secretary Mattis had to have this waiver as well. Mr. Hegseth, this hearing is about whether you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense. And one of the qualifications, to answer my colleague's question, is to actually win the votes of every member of this committee and to be confirmed by the United States Senate. And you need to convince us that you're worthy of that vote, because the people of the state of Illinois voted for me to be their senator so that I could cast that vote when it comes to picking who is going to be the next Secretary of Defense. This hearing now seems to be a hearing about whether or not women are qualified to serve in combat, and not about whether or not you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense. And let me just say that the American people need a SecDef who's ready to lead on day one. You are not that person. Our adversaries watch closely during times of transition, and any sense that the Department of Defense that keeps us safe is being steered by someone who's wholly unprepared for the job puts America at risk, and I am not willing to do that. With that in mind, Mr. Hegseth, I want you to try to explain to the American people, this committee, who have to vote for you, and to our troops who are deployed around the world why you are qualified to lead the Department of Defense. We already know that you've only led the largest, a 200-person organization. We already know that you so badly mangled a budget that after you left, they had to bring in a forensic accountant to figure out what went wrong. And that the largest budget you ever managed was about $18 billion. You know, that is about 51,560 times lower than the Department of Defense budget of $825 billion. $16 million is 51,568 times smaller than the defense budget. Please describe to me, Mr. Hegseth, you talk about DOD passing an audit. Please describe to me a time or an organization when that you led underwent an audit, because you say you're going to hire smarter people than you to run this audit. I'm not asking you to be an accountant. I want you to be able to tell me what kind of guidance will be given to those employees, what will happen whether or not you pass that audit. Have you led an audit of any organization? Yes or no? I don't want a long answer. Yes or no? Have you led an audit of any organization of which you were in charge?
Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or
with the
no,
money
did
that
you
we
lead
had.
an audit?
And the way
yes
my
or
leadership
no,
has
did you lead
been
an audit?
stated
Yes or
has
no?
been completely
What are you afraid of? You
mischaracterized.
can't answer this question. Yes or no, did you lead an audit? Do you not know this answer?
Senator,
Yes
every
or
part
no?
of my leadership
Yes
of these
or no?
organizations
Yes
has
or
been
no, did you lead an audit?
misrepresented
I will
from
take
top
that
to
as a
bottom.
no. What were the findings? Though there were no findings because you've never led an audit. What guidance did you give the auditors? None, because you've never led an audit. Nobody expects you to be an accountant, Mr. Hegseth. What we expect is for you to understand the complexity of this Pentagon budget process that is absolutely necessary to outfit our warfighters. Look, the Secretary of Defense is required to make quick decisions every single day that, well, with high-level information that's being provided for them. A Secretary of Defense has to have breadth and depth of knowledge. Right now, I am concerned that you have neither. Mr. Hegseth, what is the highest level of international negotiations that you have engaged, that you have led in? Because the Secretary of Defense does lead international security negotiations. There are three main ones that the Secretary of Defense leads and signs. Can you name at least one of them?
Could you repeat the question, Senator?
Sure. What is the highest level of international security agreement that you have led? And can you name some that the Secretary of Defense would lead? There's three main ones. Do you know?
I have not been involved in international security arrangements because I have not been in government other
Okay.
than serving in the military. So my job has been
So
to
no, the
lead
answer is,
men
can
and
you
women in
name one of the
combat.
three main ones that the
You're
Secretary
talking
of
about
Defense
defense
signs?
arrangements. I mean, NATO might be one that you're referring to.
Status of Forces Agreement would be one of them.
Status of forces agreement. I've been a part of teaching
So-
about status of forces agreements.
But you don't
inside
remember to
Afghanistan.
mention it? You're not qualified, Mr. Hegseth. You're not qualified. You talk about repairing our defense industrial complex. You're not qualified to that. You could do acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, which essentially are security agreements. You can't even mention that. You've done none of those. You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact
No, you
amount of
couldn't,
nations
because
in
you've
that,
not
but I
even
know we have
bothered to
allies
do-
in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work
Okay.
on submarines with them.
Mr.
and data
Hegseth,
transfers
none
with
of those
them.
countries
We
are
have
in
allies
ASEAN.
across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Listen, Mr. Hegseth, we ask our troops to go into harm's way all the time. We ask them to go into harm's way. And this behind me is a copy of the Soldier's Creed, a copy that usually hangs over my desk here in the Senate, and you should be familiar with it. It's the same copy that hung over my desk at Walter Reed every single day that I woke up and fought my way back because I wanted to go back and serve next to my buddies who'd saved my life. This same copy, these words are repeated over and over and over again. And let me read out two things to you, two sentences. I will always place the mission first, and I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior task. Mr. Hegseth, our troops follow these words every single day, and they man up and they pack their rucksacks and they go to war. And they deserve a leader who can lead them, not a leader who wants to lower the standards for himself or raising the standards for other people. And by the way, our troops already meet the standards. We ask troops to man that ship, fight that fire, fly that helicopter until their very last breath. And they do that every single day. They cannot be led by someone who's not competent to do the job. How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect? And by the way, he has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not quite sure he's the kind of CEO you want to refer to as a successful businessman. Let me make it clear. You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know it without the incredible women that we serve. Who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense. You say you care about keeping our armed forces strong and that you like that our armed forces are meritocracy, then let's not lower the standards for you. You, sir, are a no-go at this station.
Well, there you have it. I can't add very much more to what Senator Duckworth said. John, I'll leave that to you a little bit.
Well, the issue is not the answers. The question is the Republicans in the United States Senate. If this nominee had been put forward by a Democrat rather than a Republican, the Republicans would have unanimously opposed that confirmation. I just point that out because what we are entering now is not a period of anything more or less than partisanship on every level, whether it's Pam Bondi, whether it's the nominee for Secretary of Defense, whether it, well, you name it. And so that is what will make this administration unique in our history. I have never, in my political experience, and I'm a scholar of the American presidency, never have I seen this kind of division and this kind of arrogance by an administration which is determined to have its way no matter what. That's not the way we should work. The whole point of the United States Senate, of the advise and consent, is to build consensus so that, as is the norm in most years, cabinet nominees sail right through. This is not the case in this administration. That does not bring America together. It makes it more divisive.
Yeah, there's no question. When you see Tammy Duckworth, a veteran, Joni Ernst, a veteran, both women, and this testimony here must have made Joni Ernst, or maybe it didn't, but it ought to have made Joni Ernst feel very,
I'm
very
sure
small.
it makes her uncomfortable. But let me point out to you that if you're going to be threatened with being primaried by Donald Trump, you worry about it because you want to keep your job. What's the first obligation of every politician? To get reelected.
Get reelected and fundraise. I don't know the rules of the game here. I'd love to keep John and talk to him, Kim.
I would, if I may not to interrupt you. I do want to talk for a moment about the Middle East agreement.
That's what I'm saying. So, in terms of time, can we just run right through noon and talk to John about what's happening in the Middle East, or do we need to take a break for a minute?
Absolutely. Let's rock on. Mm-hmm.
All right, we will indeed rock on then. And just a point about everything we've just seen and what John's just told us about these hearings. They're readily available for you on C-SPAN or on any of the networks. And people make fun of me for how dull C-SPAN is, but you see people doing their jobs very often and what they're up against when you do watch C-SPAN, and it's fascinating to dip in every so often. And it doesn't make you that dull. You can still have 48 seconds of sports, which we'll get to with Albert later. So there's no worries about that. The big news today, really the headline international, the enduring headlines from today. We will not be talking about Pete Hegseth perhaps in 10 years. We will be talking about the fact that a peace was a ceasefire and agreement for hostages between Israel and Hamas was reached today. And President Biden was trumpeting it with his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and Kamala Harris. Let's not forget that this is 5 days before we get a new presidency. Remind me the moment I heard of Jimmy Carter as the inauguration of Ronald Reagan was happening, the hostages were being released in Iran and sent to Wiesbaden, Germany. I remember all of it very well. John, tie those two together, but also talk about the significance of what happened today. And also, if you can conjecture as to why, if this same deal existed in May, it was not done until today.
First, it was a bipartisan deal. That is, the Trump people and the Biden people worked together. They stood as one, which goes to show you that when the United States acts together, we can accomplish something. Number two, this proposal was originally made by Joe Biden. It was rejected. I think one of the reasons that it was now accepted is because President Trump threatened to unleash holy hell if, in fact, an agreement wasn't reached. So I think Hamas felt that pressure. There is also the simple reality that this is not a peace agreement. This is a ceasefire agreement. And that although it appears that 33 hostages will be released, we don't know how many are alive, we don't know how many are dead, and we know that there are still a tremendous number of hostages who are still being held. What does it mean in terms of peace? Not much. And I would suggest to you, I can guarantee you that if you and I are together again in 6 months, there will be renewed conflict. Hamas has not been destroyed. They have rebuilt, and they are ready again. But this is something that had to happen because the people of Israel and the people of the United States and our leaderships wanted these hostages released. Let me again point out, I just talked with a friend of mine who was visiting in Israel. I actually posted her notice on Facebook. The trauma of what Israel experienced on October 7th is lasting and permanent. The real issue here is recognition of Israel's right to exist. And I would remind you that Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis still reject the very principle of Israel's right to exist. That is something which we need to understand as a critical fact. I applaud Donald Trump for the Abraham Accords, and it is my hope that the Abraham Accords will be expanded. I know that one of Donald Trump's immediate goals is to include Saudi Arabia. That would be an achievement that is quite remarkable. So my sense now is I'm so relieved that some of the hostages are going to get out. I am not going to forget those that are still being held. I do not and will never forget what Hamas did on that day. And most important of all, I will never forgive the fact that the world essentially remains silent. Do you understand? Everything Israel did in order to achieve something had to be done without the cooperation of the world. And that to me is the ultimate tragedy. Remember that more Jews were killed on October 7th at one moment than any time since the Holocaust. Trust me when I tell you, that notion resonates. And until Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas formally say they recognize Israel's right to exist in peace and security, this problem will not be resolved.
Through the eyes of a presidential historian, talk to me a little bit about what I said about the 11th hour stuff and why this stuff seems to happen. And did it remind you of Carter and Reagan and the hostages?
It did. And I would remind you that only when Carter left office did the Iranians agree to the release. You and I still remember the flight of those hostages. And you remember, and you pointed it out, and I appreciate the fact that you did. You pointed out that President Reagan immediately dispatched former President Jimmy Carter to welcome those hostages in Germany. It was important. But I also want to draw another distinction. When Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin came together in Jerusalem in 1977, and then when the peace treaty was signed in 1979 between Egypt and Israel, those two nations were determined to end the conflict. What we now have are terrorists, and I mean Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Iran. They're not interested in peace. They are interested in erasing Israel from the map. And that is what concerns the Israelis. Although, as soon as these 33, those living and unfortunately those whose bodies will be returned, are released, there will be a general rejoicing in Israel. But understand, this is an ongoing conflict. It will not end soon. And as long as radical Islam is able to rear its ugly head, we are going to have this problem. And it's not just, by the way, Israelis. The security of Jews around the world is now in jeopardy. All of you understand that the rise of Jew hatred, I won't call it anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a polite word for Jew hatred. The rise of hatred against Jews is everywhere, particularly we find it in Europe, and I regret to say we find it here in the United States. So this is another major issue which needs to be addressed. And one thing I can tell you, what Joe Biden said is absolutely correct. American presidents standing together can make a difference. And in this case, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who may not like each other, may not trust each other, stood together to achieve this deal. And all I can say is that is the true spirit of America.
Well, we'll see if that true spirit is continued when the second guy there takes office next week, because we've never known him to not take credit for everything good.
I don't mind whatever credit he takes. I don't mind as long as something is accomplished, and that means
right, but at the expense of saying, again, this hasn't happened, so it's a fool's errand.
Sure. And by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu, just when I came on, Netanyahu's office said they are not able to confirm it. They hope it's all going to happen. And of course, I've been talking to you and listening to your program, so I don't know what has happened in the last hour, but that's something else.
I don't think we would have heard from President Biden without there having been something to talk about.
He spoke about it, but understand, Netanyahu said nothing has been signed yet. No hostages have been released yet. And what Netanyahu is saying is the proof is in the pudding, as was pointed out by several previous negotiators who I heard interviewed today. Sometimes agreements are reached and then broken. And so this is something we have to watch with great care. Right. But I personally hope that by Sunday, and that is the last I heard, by Sunday, these exchanges will have taken place, and we will all feel that great sense of gratitude for the fact that some of the hostages, not all, some of the hostages may yet be free.
And that would be something to see. And again, I'm here to talk about the politics of it, the American politics of it, not the substance of it necessarily. And I think that it is a fascinating thing for any presidential historian, anybody who follows American politics, to see this happening, when it's happening, how it's happened, and who the people involved were. And then we will see what happens going forward. John Rothmann, the podcast is Around the Political World with John Rothmann. We thank you for your time here on the Mark Thompson Show. Thanks for coming in and watching some C-SPAN with us and talking about it as well.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Take care, John.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.